describing, there are certain cues to watch for, and there are other bits that we can just sort of filter out and let recede into the background. And it is a bit like that as you get more deeply into the practice. What we use as an active filter, as a sort of practical tip, is our network, right? So when we want to separate signal from noise, so what are the signals we should really be paying attention to versus what's all the noise that is out there, we don't leave it up to our brains alone. We tap into a global network of what we call listening posts. It's a bit like having a strategic radar. If you think about the way a radar actually works, where you get further out, you get weaker signals, but you get indications of what might be emerging. So we use a global network of people who are subject matter experts, practitioners in what we do, who have been with us in some cases for 20 plus years. And if we're seeing something, we just ping them with an email or a phone call or whatever it might be, and just say, look, we're seeing this. What are we missing? What are you seeing? How does it resonate? So on and so forth. And we've got a little saying that the network always knows. If you've got a good network, somewhere within that network, someone or a collection of people will know what's going on. And it's just a matter of opening up to those networks. So that separating the noise out is often by just practicing and having an up-to-date view of conditions and then sense checking it with the world. Understanding that at the moment, you've got to be really careful about that, because there's so much deliberately being put into the world to distract us, to take people down pathways that are going to advantage someone. So it's not easy at the moment. And then use your sources wisely as well. And we'll come to that when we talk about listening posts. But that's how we do it. It's having a really good set of inputs. And, we're talking about this in the context of regional resilience. And you're all people with multiple hats in a region of Victoria, right? There's a great listening posts network already that could be forming. What would it look like if there was a sort of semi-formal or even formal kind of centralized view of conditions, a shared analysis of conditions that people could access as a community and industry resource? That could be a really powerful thing to get into action, which doesn't cost very much at all. It's just some time to keep it up to date and ensuring that however it's shared with others is effective and that people understand what it's there for. But that to me is a really obvious thing that a community or a region could be working on as a way of opening up the view and creating really valuable intelligence. What it means ultimately, of course, is that if you've got an up-to-date view of what's going on in the world, your decision-making can happen a lot more quickly. You don't have to spend 6 weeks building a case for action if you already know what's going on and you're waiting for the action to, the timing to be right, basically.
As long as you understand your own cognitive biases as well.
Yes.
Because that's where I'm seeing, people are only going to the people that already have the same view as themselves.
Yeah.
And so all it does is reinforce their thinking, which means that they just go down a myopic path and still don't end up understanding the future.
That is a great point. And that, for us, that comes back to that network, right? So you've got to really ping people who don't have the same view. Some of you might have seen, or you might have been accessing some of the podcasts we've been putting out. We've been trying to interview and share some thoughts from folks. And we're very conscious that a number of the people that we've interviewed do align with what we're seeing. So we've also been trying to find people who don't, to get their view of the world as well, so that there is a more robust view of what's going on. Don't have to agree, just it's about context and an understanding of context. All right, so how do we do this conditions analysis piece? So some really quick definitions, and then we'll get into some practice together. So conditions, as I've just said, it's about context. It's providing a context for decision making. And when you're trying to make decisions in an organization or at a community scale, it's about sharing that context. Often we carry bits of it in our heads, but we don't have the conversation to create a shared understanding of what we know is happening in terms of immediate conditions and what might be emerging. And it's not that difficult to do. There's a bit of divergence in that, right? Because you get everybody's view of everything that's going on. Then you start looking for what are the common themes and patterns that help us make sense of that reality. So it's just creating that context for decision making. We use the language of conditions because people already know what conditions are, right? Condition in the dictionary is just the state of something. Here you can see that there's a whole bunch of umbrellas in a bin. Well, they're not in very good nick. That's condition. But equally, conditions are the situation with respect to circumstances. It's just reality, right? And when we teach people to think about conditions, we use weather as a simple metaphor for explaining conditions. If it's raining, right? That's the condition. What you want to think about is what's the value that I'm seeking to generate in that context. So if I'm a farmer in drought, then generally speaking, rain is a positive condition. But if I get too much rain too fast, it might destroy my crop. So then it's not a positive condition. Equally, somebody else might be going, well, we had a family reunion planned for the weekend and it's meant to be pouring. So it's a negative condition. So the positive or negative, the good or bad of conditions has to do with our biases, and it has to do with what we're trying to create in terms of value in the world or in the systems that we're a part of. So one thing that we find, and this is something really important to check as we get into talking about conditions, is that when you try to speak objectively, our biases will often hear conditions as negative. And I've been in so many workshops and sessions where people go, okay, that's great, but can we go find the positive conditions now? And it's like, they're not negative or positive, they just are. And when you think about immediate and emergent in the context of weather, we all have a sense of the immediate conditions. I can look out the window here, it's raining, but we have a weather map and a weather radar system which tells us what's emerging. And if I know that what is emerging behind the light rain that's falling in Wood End at the moment is a severe storm, my behavior is going to change accordingly because I've interpreted the opportunities and the risk that presents, right? And all I'm doing in the weather example is making sure that I'm up to date on a regular basis. So when we work with organizations or with communities, and we say, when you're working on your strategy, how often do you update your view of what's going on in the world? Most it's quarterly or maybe annually. And we'll say, okay, so how many of us check the weather once a year and then make our decisions about how we operate in the world for the rest of the year based on a one-off check of the weather? We don't do that. It's not how we behave in the world. So why would we not, as an organization, have an up-to-date view of what's immediate, what's emergent, a really good strategic radar? That's sort of question number one and point number one. And again, it's the context for it's where we live, it's where we work, where we play. Again, not good or bad, right? It's just the conditions. So in this context, the reality for the gentleman trying to defend the goal is that he's waist deep in mud. It's probably not very good, but that same set of conditions could be quite positive for somebody who's going to have a shot on goal. Because it gives them, a lot more space to potentially score a goal. It just is what it is. Comes back to value generation or capabilities, how those work together as a system, opportunity and risk. So what we want to do is remove those biases, which is important, particularly if you're working with others, to sort of call those out. And again, if you get the conditions wrong, you end up doing things like having a picnic in the rain. Which is not necessarily what we want to do, unless for some reason this group thought that was the right thing to do. It doesn't really look like that. So that's really the basics of conditions. So just to sense check it, I just wanted to check with the group. Can you think of examples where you're already using a version of conditions analysis to inform and guide decision making, whether it's at a personal level, in an organizational level, in what you're doing in communities? Just some quick examples.
Well, at a personal level, I've been watching the decline of the universities over some time and diversifying my income so that I don't get stuck working for just one, which I was, and now I was working across three. So to make sure that, if one went down, I
Yeah.
still had the other.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect example. Yeah, seeing a really complex set of conditions around universities, which we could do a whole separate session on sometime. Other examples of watching conditions?
David, we've been planning some events for around Australia this year early on, starting back in January, and just the whole COVID thing, and watching the conditions of different states having their different restrictions, and working for a company that, where safety is paramount, just having to adapt how we bring people together for that. And the upside is I've learned a hell of a lot of new skills, and opportunities have opened up from these restrictions. So it's they are just what they are, like you say, but you can turn them into what you can turn them into something positive.
And that's a terrific point, Emma. One of the things when we take people down into how do you design catalytic actions is part of that is understanding that in a traditional kind of plan it, manage it, measure it approach, what we often do is we ignore all the value add that occurs along the way. What you've just described is you're building new capabilities in real time based on operating as the conditions are suggesting you should, and paying attention to that, which is really powerful. And it's something that we often don't pay attention to. We ignore it sometimes in organizations. There's all this broad capability that gets developed and just discarded because it didn't fit with the plan that we were on.
I've got one just at the moment where I'm actually making some decisions. I'm being accepted to give a paper up in Rockhampton. So I'm trying to work out how I can get from Beechworth, Victoria to Rockhampton, and keeping an eye on all the stuff in terms of what the rules are going to be in opening and shutting borders. Costs. Quite interesting, actually. So I think I can do it all over the place, but it's quite a roundabout route. So it's quite
And that's a great example, right? Just a good analysis of what's going on to make some decisions about what's my likely journey. But also, I presume, Narelle, you're not going to just make the decision today and then start paying attention to what's going on. You'll have to monitor that all the way through.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And if New South Wales opens up to regional Victoria, that is a different scenario, and that makes my life easier. So, all that stuff.
Yeah. Terrific. Great examples. So why does this become ever more important, do you think, in disruption? Why is conditions a critical part of operating in disruptive change? Any thoughts about that?
My immediate reaction would be, I think the risks get expanded. So you actually need to know where the potential problems are going to be so you can work your way around it.
Yeah, absolutely, right. So we do get an amplification of risk. We maybe get a bias towards risk that starts to emerge. So we stop seeing opportunity on the other side of risk. Yeah, for sure. What else?
I think it's interesting because I think by knowing the risks, you become safer. So a couple of years ago when I was looking around, and I guess it's back to the example, I decided that I was going to move to regional Australia, and here particularly because I saw certain things, sort of working from home, digital, etc., and also not buying into sort of a massive mortgage that allows you to not be able to be adaptable. So by thinking about some of those conditions, I think, and understanding them, you can begin to put yourself into a scenario which allows you the flexibility. You almost, there are decisions you know you can't make, but will have to at some point, and you get yourself into a scenario that you can just flex with those. So for me, it almost gives you security and insecurity in a way. It's bizarre.
Yes. I think, some of the language that's used is the idea of being anti-fragile, because you have that ability to adapt and morph and shift as is required. Equally, one of the things that we see as critical, particularly in disruption, is because disruption is non-linear and it's systemic. If you don't really understand the sort of whole system's conditions, then you end up sort of having blind spots, really. So it's a way of covering the blind spots. So it is that, and by keeping the view up to date, the ability I think to flex and flow just a bit more quickly, exactly as you said, Maureen.